Thursday, November 14th, 6:38 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock on the microwave when my phone buzzed on the counter, and I remember thinking it was too early for anything good to come from a phone call. I was wrong about that. It turned out to be the most important call of the last 30 years of my life. What I'm about to tell you is what I found when I drove back to that house, and what I did about it over the next 11 days. I want you to know up front I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't give either of them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. By the time it was over, I didn't need to. My name is Gerald Patton. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a mid-sized commercial roofing company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Not the kind of business that gets written up in magazines, but the kind that puts a crew of 14 men to work every morning and pays for itself honestly year after year. I'm a grandfather twice over. I drink my coffee black. I still drive the same Ford F-250 I bought in 2019. And I am, by nature, the kind of man who assumes the best about the people closest to him. That last part is relevant to everything that follows. The call that Thursday morning came from a man named Arthur Webb. Now, before I tell you what Arthur said, I need you to understand who Arthur Webb was to me, because without that context, you won't feel the weight of what happened next. Arthur had been our next-door neighbor on Sycamore Ridge Drive for 22 years. He moved in about 8 months after my wife Sandra and I did, back when our daughter Claire was still in middle school and the neighborhood was quiet enough that you actually knew everybody on your block by name. He was retired Army, 30 years, infantry, 2 tours, and he carried that background the way some men carry a scar, quietly, without making it anyone else's business. He mowed his lawn on the same schedule every single week. He shoveled my driveway twice without being asked the winter after my knee surgery in 2017. When my mother passed, he came over with a pot of soup his wife Helen had made and sat on my porch with me for 2 hours without saying much of anything, which was exactly what I needed. Arthur wasn't the kind of man who made phone calls before 7 in the morning. He wasn't the kind of man who called at all unless he had a reason that mattered. So, when his name came up on my screen at 6:38 on a Thursday morning in November, something in my chest dropped before I even answered. "Gerald," he said. And there was something different in his voice. Not nervous, exactly. Arthur didn't do nervous. It was more like controlled, like a man holding something heavy and making sure he didn't drop it. "I need you to do something for me before you come home today." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I know you're up in Knoxville at the convention through tomorrow. I need you to stay put for right now and check your home security app. Something happened last night that you need to see for yourself before you walk through that front door." I asked him what kind of something. He paused, and Arthur Webb was not a man who paused, and then he said, "I'm not going to describe it to you over the phone, Gerald. Just pull up the cameras, and call me back when you've seen it. I'll be right here." And then he waited. I need to tell you something about that pause. I've thought about it many times since. Arthur knew exactly what was on those cameras. He had seen it himself. I found out later he'd been watching from his upstairs window when the lights in my garage came on at 11:40 at night, a full 2 hours after Sandra had told me by text that she was going to bed early. He'd noted the car in the driveway. He recognized it. And instead of calling me then, at midnight, he waited until morning, because he understood that some information needs to arrive when a man has a full night's rest behind him, and not when he's lying in the dark in a hotel room 2 hours from home. That's who Arthur Webb was. I was sitting in a room at the Knoxville Marriott on the 8th floor when I opened the security app on my phone. We'd had the cameras installed 4 years ago after a package theft on the street. I checked them maybe once a month. I had absolutely no expectation of what I was about to see. The driveway camera showed a car parked at an angle in front of my garage at 11:44 at night. Not in the driveway, exactly partway in, partway on the apron, like someone who'd pulled in a hurry or didn't want to park all the way. I recognized the car immediately. It was a silver Cadillac CT5. I'd ridden in that car to a Titans game 2 Octobers ago. It belonged to a man named Paul Greer. Paul Greer had been my accountant for 11 years. He managed the books for Patton Roofing, handled my personal taxes, set up the SEP IRA I'd been contributing to since 2009, and had sat across from me at my kitchen table more times than I could count going over quarterly numbers. He was 58, divorced, pleasant in the careful way of men who are always calculating what they're saying. Sandra had always liked him. She said he was thorough. She said he had good instincts. I had agreed. I switched to the side camera, the one that covers the back patio and the door into the kitchen. At 11:47, the kitchen light was on. I could see two figures through the window glass, not clearly, not faces, just shapes and movement. I turned the audio up as high as it would go. It was thin, the way audio through a wall always is, but I heard enough. I heard Sandra laugh. That particular laugh short, almost private, not the one she used in company. I heard Paul say something about a signature page, and then I heard Sandra say, "He's not back until Friday. We have time." I sat in that hotel room for a long time after that. The convention I was attending was for regional roofing contractors, 2 days of seminars and vendor tables and dinners I had no interest in. I'd been going for 9 consecutive years. I had a panel presentation scheduled for Friday afternoon that I was now not going to give. I didn't call Sandra. I didn't call Paul. I did something that surprised even me. I called Arthur back. He answered on the first ring. "How long have you been watching this?" I asked him. He didn't pretend to misunderstand the question. "His car was there 3 times in the last month," Arthur said. "Once on a Tuesday when you were at a job site, twice at night. Last night was the longest. He didn't leave until after 1 a.m. He stopped, then said, 'I should have called you sooner, Gerald. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be the man who said something wrong.' I told him he'd done right. He said, 'I know you, Gerald. You're going to want to think before you do anything. So think, whatever time you need.' Here is what I want to say about that moment, because I've thought about it often since. Arthur Webb did not have to make that call. He was 1 years old. He had no stake in whatever happened between me and Sandra, or between me and Paul Greer. He made that call because 22 years of being neighbors had built something between us that neither of us had ever formally named, but both of us understood. He made that call because he believed that the people in your life who've been straight with you deserve to have someone be straight with them. That's all. That was enough. I did not drive back to Chattanooga that day. I told Sandra by text that the convention had a dinner event I couldn't skip, and that I'd be home by mid-afternoon Friday. She replied with a heart emoji. I stared at that heart emoji for longer than I'd like to admit. I called my attorney that evening. Her name is Beverly Okafor, and she had been handling Patton Roofing's legal work for 8 years. I told her what I'd seen and heard. She asked me 3 questions in a row without stopping: whose name was on the company ownership documents, whose name was on the business accounts, and had I recently signed anything Paul Greer had brought to me. The answer to all 3, in order, was mine. And yes, 6 weeks ago. What Paul had described as a routine update to my business banking authorization. Beverly went quiet for a moment and then said, "Gerald, I need you to stay calm and give me until tomorrow afternoon. Don't go home. Don't confront either of them, and don't access any business accounts until I call you." I asked her what she thought the signature document was. She said, "I think we're going to find out it wasn't what you were told it was." She was right. She called me back at 2:17 the next afternoon. What I had signed 6 weeks earlier, in the belief that it was a routine authorization update, was in fact a partial transfer of signatory authority over the main Patton Roofing operating account to a second name, a name I didn't recognize, attached to a business entity I had never heard of, registered 4 months earlier in Georgia. Beverly had pulled the registration records. The registered agent for that Georgia LLC was Paul Greer. I want to be honest about what I felt in the moment Beverly told me that. It wasn't rage, although the rage was there underneath it. It was something closer to the cold, clarifying feeling you get when you've been walking in fog, and the fog suddenly lifts, and you can see exactly where the ground drops off in front of you. I had trusted Paul Greer with 11 years of financial work. I had trusted Sandra with 31 years of my life. And what I was looking at, on paper, was a plan to drain a portion of the operating account of my business before I had any reason to look. I need to address something directly here, because it's the thing I've been asked about most since. People ask me why I didn't go straight to the police, and I want to answer that honestly, because I think it matters. Beverly's advice was clear. We had the documentation to pursue this criminally, and that option was not off the table. But she also told me that criminal proceedings would make everything public, would freeze business accounts for months during investigation, and would put my crew of 14 men in a position where their paychecks became uncertain while the courts sorted it out. I had a crew chief named Marcus, who'd been with me for 19 years. I had 2 guys who were putting kids through school. I had a 26-year-old named Dion who'd just bought his first house. The decision I made, and I made it deliberately, not because I was weak, not because I wanted to protect Sandra or Paul, was that I was not going to let my business bleed while the law moved at its own pace. What I was going to do instead was make absolutely certain that neither of them could touch another dollar. Beverly moved fast. Over the next 7 days, she revoked the signatory authorization, using a procedural mechanism that didn't require advance notice to Paul, had the Georgia LLC flagged by the State Banking Commission for irregular registration practices, restructured the ownership of Patton Roofing into a family trust, naming my daughter Claire and my 2 grandchildren as beneficiaries, with an ironclad clause preventing any transfer or access without Claire's direct written consent, and transferred the primary operating account to a new institution entirely under a new account structure that Paul's credentials had no access to. I went home Friday evening, exactly when I said I would. I kissed Sandra on the cheek when I walked in. I ate dinner at my own kitchen table. I slept in my own bed. And Sandra did not know, sitting across from me, that every financial thread connecting her and Paul Greer to my company had been quietly, permanently, and legally cut. During those 7 days, I did something else. I met with a financial advisor I had never used before, someone Beverly recommended, completely outside my existing network, and I set up a separate account in Arthur Webb's name. Not enormous, but enough to matter. Enough that if he ever had a medical bill his insurance didn't cover, or a repair on the house he and Helen had lived in for 30 years, it would be handled. I wrote him a letter explaining what I'd done and why. I didn't make a big moment out of it. I left it in his mailbox on a Wednesday morning. He called me that evening and didn't say much, just that it wasn't necessary. And I told him that was exactly the kind of thing a man says when something is entirely necessary. And he laughed. And that was the end of it. On day 8, Sandra noticed something. She had a habit of checking certain account balances from her phone, not the business accounts, but a joint personal account we shared for household expenses. The balance hadn't changed, but something about the app's interface had updated after the bank restructuring, and she started asking me questions over dinner about whether I'd made any changes to our banking. I said I'd had Beverly do some routine business restructuring and left it at that. She seemed to accept it. She texted Paul Greer that night. I saw the notification on her phone when it lit up on the counter, not the content, just his name. She sent it at 9:52 p.m. I went to bed at 10:15 without saying anything. The missed calls started on day 9. Paul called my cell 4 times between 8 and 11 in the morning. He then called the office line, where Marcus told him I was on a job site and unavailable. He sent an email at 1:30 in the afternoon with the subject line, "Urgent accounting question," that I read and did not answer. Sandra sent me 3 texts over the course of the day that became progressively more specific in ways that told me she already knew something had shifted, even if she didn't know how much. By day 10, Paul had retained his own attorney. Beverly found out through a contact and called to let me know. She wasn't concerned. "He can retain whoever he wants," she said. "He has nothing to work with." On the evening of day 11, I sat Sandra down at the kitchen table. Just the 2 of us. I didn't invite anyone else. I didn't need a witness or a supporter. I put Beverly's summary document on the table between us 2 pages. Clean, factual, laying out what the signature document actually authorized, what the Georgia LLC was, what the account transfer had been intended to accomplish, and what Beverly had done about all of it. Sandra looked at those pages for a long time. She was quiet, in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Not the quiet of innocence, the quiet of someone calculating what's still recoverable. She said, "Gerald, I can explain." I said, "I've read the documents, Sandra. Beverly's read the documents. The Georgia Banking Commission has the documents. There isn't anything left to explain." She asked me, voice lower now, if there was anything left between us. I told her the honest truth. I told her that whatever I once believed about our marriage had been built on something that, it turned out, she had been undermining for long enough that I couldn't find the edges of it anymore. I told her I wasn't interested in punishing her for the rest of her life, but I also wasn't capable of sitting at this table and pretending the last 11 days hadn't happened. She left that night, stayed with her sister in Nashville. Paul Greer, I found out a few months later through an industry contact, had his CPA license reviewed by the state board and ultimately surrendered it in lieu of a formal disciplinary proceeding. He did not practice again, at least not under his own name. I didn't orchestrate that. Beverly had filed the appropriate regulatory notifications as part of the restructuring process, and the commission did what it does. I didn't make a single phone call to make any of that happen. I still live in Chattanooga, still run Patton Roofing, though I've been transitioning management responsibility to Marcus for the past 18 months, which is something I should have started 5 years ago. He's steady, he's fair with the crew, and he cares about the work. Claire and I have dinner most Sundays. My grandkids call me Pop. The house on Sycamore Ridge Drive is quieter than it used to be, and some nights that's a hard thing and some nights it isn't. Arthur Webb is still next door. Helen brings over tomatoes from their garden every August. He and I sit on his back porch sometimes in the evening when the weather is right, and we talk about very little in particular, the way old friends do when they've already said most of the things that matter. He never brought up the phone call again. Neither have I, really. It doesn't need to be talked about. It already was what it was. There is one more thing I want to say before I close, friends, because I think it's the part of this story that took me the longest to understand. For a while after everything settled, I kept asking myself how I had missed it. 11 years of trusting Paul Greer with my books. 31 years of trusting Sandra with my life. How do you miss something that was apparently right there to be seen? And the honest answer is that I wasn't missing it because I was stupid. I was missing it because I was paying attention to the wrong things. I was paying attention to the work, to the crew, to the quarterly numbers, to all the visible, concrete parts of my life that I knew how to manage. And the things that deserved more careful watching, the small inconsistencies, the moments that didn't add up, the way a conversation would shift when I walked into a room. I explained those away, without stopping to actually look at them. Arthur didn't explain them away. He saw what he saw, and he held on to it until he could hand it to me carefully, at the right time, in the right way. He didn't do it for a reward. He didn't do it because he was involved. He did it because 22 years of living next door to a man means something, if you let it mean something. I think a lot of us, if we're being straight with ourselves, know someone like Arthur. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's someone who's worked alongside you for years. Maybe it's someone who never asks for much and never makes speeches about loyalty, but who simply shows up, over and over, in the small, consistent ways that don't look like much until you need them to. Pay attention to those people. Before you need them, not after. And when they hand you something hard to hear, receive it the way Arthur intended it, not as an attack on your life, but as someone who believes your life is worth protecting. If this story meant something to you, friends, hit subscribe and leave me a comment below. Tell me about the person in your corner who told you the truth when it would have been easier to stay out of it. I'd genuinely like to hear about them.